Hey guys, Beyond here today with a meta report of the new expansion Skybound Dragons. So today we're going to go through the top performing decks of the meta and how they all operate. So let's get right into it. So we are currently on shadowversemaster.com. So I'll put a link in the description below so you can check out all the deck lists at your own leisure after the video. But the first deck we have for you today is Earthright Rune. So it's definitely the best deck in format currently. What makes this deck so strong is that it's a very consistent deck that has a strong game plan against every deck of the meta right now. So it has a large amount of 2-drops, so it can contest the board early. On 4 play points, it has a lot of cards that can either be evolved or not evolved and still end the opponent's field while putting pressure on them and forcing them to burn their Evo points instead. And then from kind of your 8 play point onwards, you can play Lilanthim, and then if this card is not cleared, you can threaten for lethal using cards like Sandalphon. So the other strong thing about this is not only can it clear the enemy board, but it's not even an effective strategy to hit this deck in the face because of the fact that it has the traditional very strong options of Sagelight and also Norman in order to heal up that damage. So this deck is very hard to kind of beat at the moment. And I'll go through a few of the other key cards that you should be aware of. So the first one is a new gold spell, so Alchemic Flare. 2 play points, select an enemy follower on the field and deal 4 damage, gain an Earth Sigil. And in addition, Skybound Art, deal 2 damage to the enemy leader. So this card's obviously good in the early game when you need to clear like their 3/3s or whatever. But in addition, this card is also good in the late game. So when you're going for lethal, 2 damage to face is never a bad thing, but in addition, it sets you up Sandalphon. So this card is basically one of your main win conditions. So you invoke it if you've evolved 6 times this match, and then also it has a super Skybound effect where it deals 2 damage to a random enemy 5 times. And so the way you use this kind of to end the game, so you clear the board with your 4 play points first, and then you play this to do 10 damage to enemy leader. And so this combos extremely well with cards like Alchemic Flare because you're also clearing the board and dealing damage to enemy leader. So you can potentially play 2 of these and then deal 14 damage to the enemy leader, for example. In addition, this crest effect, when it gets invoked, is that you heal your entire board by 1 HP over 2 turns. So whatever will take those. And this also combos a little bit with some of your 2-drops. So you can also like shuffle it back in the deck with Apprentice Astrologer, and then it will invoke again the turn after. So just a neat trick that you can kind of think about. And so this list, it just runs 8 copies of 2-drops, so you can always contest the early game board. They all generate Earth Sigils. And then basically on turn 4 is when you'll usually start spending it. So cards like the Sagelight Ward, so Edelweiss, you pay 2 Earthrights, and then basically it evolves, deals 4 damage to random enemy follower, and recovers 2 play points. And because it's an evolve card, it also kind of synergizes with your Super Skybound Arts, and so you can charge that up as well. You also have the traditionally very strong Enchanting Perfumer, so you deal 3 damage to enemy follower, and when you evolve, you do it again. It also generates Earth Sigils. And then we've got the new card, so we've got Grand Integrator, so this card is Pot of Greed on a body, so 3/2. But also, you can deal 5 damage to a random enemy follower if you don't want to draw 2 cards. And if you have Skybound Art active, it evolves for free into a 5/4. So this card's very strong in the late game, but it's even good early game because it draws you 2 cards or it can clear a follower on the board. And then apart from that, we have 3 copies of the new Cagliostro Genius Alchemist. So it's a 5/3, you gain 2 Earth Sigils, which is great. Like the fact that you get that without even needing to evolve it, and you get Ars Magna, which is a token that deals 2 damage to an enemy, and then you heal for 1 as well. And Skybound Art, free ever, okay, what's not to like? But Super Skybound Art, if you get to this, you get a free, or almost free Ars Magna every turn. So 2 damage ping, and you can save that until you have lethal, or if you really need the healing. So in the late game, you never really lose when it comes to like your Super Skybound Arts, your Skybound Arts. Like it's hard for people to overcome that difference, especially when you're basically drawing 2 cards with Grand Integrator and stuff like that. And then we also have this new card here. So this is a 5 play point silver, so 3/3, and you summon another copy of it, and if you Earthright 2, you evolve it and the other follower, right? So 2 evolves, both 5/5, or any 5 play points and 2 Earth Sigils. It's insane, right? It charges you up really hard for your Skybound Arts. And then you have Norman, as always, cards broken. The only thing is that in this particular deck, sometimes you will want to draw 3 cards. It is possible to run low. And then once you've activated this draw 3 cards once, you never run out of cards for the rest of the game. But of course, I think in this deck, probably the best option is maybe just 2 Guardian Golems, to be honest. Like, it's really hard to clear for the current meta, and it gives you so much breathing room for later. And then of course, we have Sandalphon, so it's your win condition. And then Lilanthim, so this card is extremely hard for a lot of decks to deal with. Only really Wardhaven or Cresthaven have a great answer to this. And so the super combo is basically, if you play this turn 8, they don't clear it. Or if they do clear it, but it's a 5/5, then you super evo this at the start turn, you clear the board, swing 8 to face, and then have no board, so you play Sandalphon, and it's 10 damage, so 18 damage, and then you play any card that does 2 damage to Cagliostro's spell, or alternatively Alchemic Flare, right? So you've got a bunch of options, And effectively, this is a potential OTK. Now, it's not that consistently like the case that you'll have this, but you'll see it come up often enough, and basically a very clean way to kind of end the game. So this deck, I think you just play it as a normal mid-range deck, and then once you have like a lethal option come up, you just go for it, and usually it'll just come up with a win. So very strong, very consistent, great kind of matchup spread. So yeah, if you want to win, definitely try and play this deck in the first few days of the meta. So next up, we do have Wardhaven. So it's an 18 win streak list, and effectively it has merged together kind of the Cresthaven and the Wardhaven best aspects and put them into one deck. So the new cards for the deck is basically this 3 play point Galleon Earth Personified. So it's a 5/5 ward. Now, can't attack followers or leaders, but basically because of the way the game works right now, if they can't clear this, they're going to have troubles later on anyway. And so this is a really big wall, and it basically single-handedly shuts down all of aggressive decks and counterplay to the deck in general. Also, at the end of your turn, if you've unlocked Super Evolution, you evolve a random unevolved allied follower on the field that didn't attack this turn. And because you're running the Crest package, not really a downside in order to use. And so it makes sense to kind of merge both of these together, build a super big board, and then eventually, if they don't clear your board, then you can start swinging face, right? And then during this whole time, your Crest effects are kind of popping off, and then basically you gain a huge amount of value. And so we are just running like all of the strongest ward cards. We're running 2 copies of the Stellar Field, so you can either draw 2 cards to destroy a random enemy follower. We're running 2 copies of this card draw as well, and then also 2 copies of Vera, so new legendary. So 8 play point 6/8, can't take more than 3 damage at a time. Select 2 enemy followers in the field and fanfare and banish them, which is super strong. And then super Skybound Art, super evolve this follower. And of course the awards, so synergize with cards with Wilbert. So just in general, like if you haven't played this deck before, basically you want to set up 3 crests. So you ideally want to have Grimnir, Marwyn, and Wilbert active. You want these 3 active. So you always have the option to do 3 ping damage if needed. And then Wilbert basically, once it's active, it busts all of your followers. So basically you can use cards like Ether to flood the board. Keep in mind that Ether can actually bring out Galleon. So it's a 5/5 by sub, but with Wilbur it becomes a 6/7, I believe it is, which is kind of insane. And so you can kind of overwhelm the opponent pretty easily. It's a very hard deck to kind of, counteract because of the fact that you can keep building the Great Wall of China over and over again, and then eventually your opponent just won't have an out to it. So yeah, overall, I think this is a great deck at the moment, and the fact that it does have some counterplay in the form of Marwyn against Lilanthim is like always a good thing. So yeah, I mean, Wardhaven is definitely the way to go if you're playing Cresthaven or Wardhaven in the previous expansion. So next up, we've got a new build of Lishenna Portal using the new cards from the new set. So effectively, we have the Evo package, so cards like Vryn, it evolves for free once you have Super Evo. And then also you have cards like this. So this one, it increases Skybound Art gauges with all your cards in hand by 1, but it's also got Rush, which is kind of insane. So 3/1 Rush, that has another upside. Very good, very good. And then also it's running a standard destruction package, running 3 copies of Luo. So this card, this does 6 damage on fanfare to the enemy board, but it does have the downside buffing your opponent's cards in hand by +1/+0. However, because it's a 5 play point 6/6, which you don't even need to Evo, it basically means that you're clearing their board, they have to Evo to clear this, but who really cares, right? And in the late game, when you are trying to stall out for that win, you can play this, clear the board, and then their Storm can't hit your leader. So effectively, this card is very, very strong for what Lishenna wants to do. We have 3 copies of Grand Agitator, so basically, as always, draws 2 cards if you need it, but also this deal 5 damage to random enemy follower is very important, and in the late game, you can just play this for 4 play points, ping your board for 5, and then crash this for 5/4 into something else, and then you have control of the board, and you ping them with Lishenna eggs. Also, we have, just in general, kind of this new card here, so 5 play point 5/4, got a clash effect, so 3 damage opposing a follower. So basically through combat it will kill everything that tries to attack it, or you try to attack into something else. Also with Skybound Art, you can select another unevolved allied follower in the field and involve it and this follower. So huge tempo swing when you get it off, and also it represents kind of 2 Evos without you needing to spend an Evo point, which is very strong. And then also we've got 2 copies of the new 6 play point gold, so 3 damage to all enemy followers, including leader, by the way. And then Super Skybound Art, deals 6 damage instead. So great way to close the game and also to clear the board at the same time. Worth considering as well. And then 2 copies of Sandalphon, so it's very easy to kind of get the invoke effect with this particular deck. And then also it's kind of your late game insurance, right? Where if your opponent doesn't like build a board, then you can just play this to a 10 damage enemy leader. So it's always great. And then 2 copies of Beelzebub, so this card is very good in Lishenna because of the fact that you're clearing the board, and also the opponent's leader gains take 1 more damage, which synergizes strongly with your eggs. So Overall, like basically it's running a lot of the new cards from the new set. And I think they kind of work well. Like we're not running Odin anymore. Like we don't really feel like we need to, for instance. Basically, I think this is an interesting way of building Lishenna. I think it's worth trying out. Next up, we've got a very, I would say, kind of troll build of Spellboost runes. So it has cut the Kaitis package in favor of a more board-oriented and kind of, you have to answer this board or you lose kind of approach, right? So it's running kind of, this one play point card that can spell boost for 1 from turn 1, which is fine. And then you've got kind of, these tempo options. So you're running stuff like Emilu. So it makes evolve Clay Golem and then deals X damage to all enemy followers. So basically, I think like the point of this deck is basically you want to flood the board in 1 turn, and then you drop Wumpus, I think it's called, and then basically Wumdus, sorry. And then this card is huge, and the super evolve effect gives everything barrier. And then you just go, okay, try and answer this board. And if you can't answer the board, then you basically win the game insta. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how I feel about this list, but obviously, like, this guy did get a 10 win streak. I think it is literally just you drop everything, you dimension climb, you drop like 8 6s, and then you drop like this Wumdus, hopefully like maybe even 2 Wumdus or something like that. And like if the deck doesn't have something like a Themis or like a Unholy Grey or something like that, like they might not be able to out it, and then you can just win from there. Next up, we have an 18 win streak Loot Sword deck. So this is very similar to the last expansion. The only difference is that we are now running 3 copies of Zeta and Bea, Crimson and Blue. So this is a very obvious kind of replacement for cards like, let's just say, your Zirconia, right? Because although Zirconia is great when, your opponent can't answer it and then you basically push for 1 billion damage in turn 5, but this card is better in the sense that, like, you can play it on turn 4, but you can also play this late game, and you can clear the board while hitting face with the Enhanced 6 effect, right? Which is more in line or in tune with Loot Sword's overall game plan, which is like every card you play wants to clear board while dealing damage to enemy face. And Zirconia doesn't quite do that, whereas Zeta and Bea does. So it's a great inclusion for the Loot Sword deck, and it does seem to be doing quite well. So next up, we've got a pretty traditional build of Ram Dragon. So this deck got buffed significantly by the addition of Zui, Ally of the World. So it's a 5 play point 5/5. On Fanfare, you gain 1 max play point, which is very strong because you can go turn 3 Dragon Sign. And you can play Zui on turn 4, and then you can play Wilderness on turn 5. Right, so this curve is insane, and you'll usually win games just based on that alone. Let's have Enhanced 10, so sometimes you can cheese kind of game wins out by playing 2 copies of this. The opponent just somehow dies. And then in addition, basically Wilderness. So the way you play this card is you just slam it, you don't need to evolve it. And basically if your opponent can't out this, they lose the game on the spot. If they do out it, well, maybe you play another Wilderness, or you play like a Garyu, or potentially you play a Forte. And if they can't out that, they lose again. So basically you're kind of checking them, and if they have the outs, okay, sure, you lose. If they don't have the outs, you win. And it's as simple as that. And then also you have Lyria. So this card, you can play it early game against aggro, but also if you ramp early, this card will definitely get you Wilderness or Garyu. So you have like a more consistent kind of end game, right? And so like basically this is a very refined version, in my opinion, of Ram Dragon. Like it does what it wants to do almost every game. And you might want to change it based on if you want to change the parameters, so you do different things than what this deck is aiming for, which is Wilderness and Garyu consistently. So for example, you can instead like run Neptune or something like that, right? So you can infinitely heal against like a Loot Sword meta or something like that. But yeah, basically the sky's the limit, no pun intended, for Ram Dragon right now. And then also we run 3 copies of Grand Vegeta, so you just draw 2 cards in general, and then deal 5 damage to random enemy follower is actually huge. So like in the past, you couldn't really, coin out Dragon Sign because you had no 4 play point card in order to play. But now you can just play Grand Vegeta, and then this is a very, very, very strong like kind of turn 4 play. And apart from that, like there's not really too much else to say. It's a very straightforward deck. If you enjoy playing Ram Dragon, you're going to enjoy playing it this expansion too. So the last deck we have coverage for today is Puppet Portal. So the 12 win streak deck, and does run a few new cards from the expansion. So it's running 2 copies of Beelzebub. So this card is extremely strong late game option. So you basically destroy 2 followers in the field while removing all abilities from them. So their last words are gone for sure. And then also the enemy leader takes 1 more damage. So this is huge in relation to cards like Liam, cards like Orcus. Like Orcus, for instance, would be doing like 4 or 5 extra damage, like after you've resolved Beelzebub, right? And then apart from that, you're also running kind of your traditional kind of storm option like Odin. You've got 1 copy of Chaos Legion, so it's a bit more reach. And playing this in turn 6 when like they have a white board and you do 3 damage to the leader is really, really good, to be honest. Or turn 7, like basically the turn where you're bridging and you want to kind of play your storm options from there onwards, right? 2 copies of Grand Vegeta. So Puppet Portal traditionally has a weakness where they don't have that many draw cards. And now finally you can kind of play this instead of Sylvia, for instance. where now you're drawing 2 cards for 4 play points, and then it's got an upside Skybound art. So that's always a great option as well. And then apart from that, it's a pretty standard list, so it doesn't play substantially different from previous iterations of Puppet Portal, but it has been buffed. So if you enjoy Puppet Portal, definitely give it a shot. So that just about does it for the day 1 meta report of the new expansion. So Earthright Rune is definitely the deck to play or to beat right now. So if you want to earn some very quick wins, I do recommend playing Earthright Rune. However, I do think that there's a bunch of other decks that you can play. So for example, whether it's Wardhaven, whether it's Spellboost Rune, Lishenna Portal, or stuff like Loot Sword even, all of these decks are good enough to get wins in the ladder right now. And then Puppet Portal, of course, this is also a great deck right now. Just following the footsteps of Barik, the SVO Grand Champion. So basically, he was the only person who thought that Puppet Portal was a great bring for that event, and he ended up being undefeated in that event and winning the whole thing, right? So just believe in your heart of the cards, and it'll always work out well, right? So, but yeah, basically, I do think that we'll end up seeing a bit of a development over the next couple of weeks. So I do think, for example, Roach Forest is a deck that always ends up seemingly getting more and more viability as the expansion progresses. So we saw in expansion 2, expansion 3, like at first, like nobody was playing Roach, and then towards the end, you know, it was topping like all of the major tournaments. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see the same thing happen here. Of course, if Wardhaven is a really great deck, then we won't see too much of it. But, you know, if Wardhaven's not a popular deck, then by all means, reach away with Roach Forest. But the best way to keep track of the meta is obviously by following this YouTube channel, subscribing, and so every time I come up with a new video that basically covers meta, you'll be able to get it right away. And so I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and I will see you guys next time.